So my name's Angela Mackay. I am the Managing Director and Publisher of the Financial Times in Asia Pacific. I've been in that role for about 7 years, I think. Before that, I was their Commercial Director, and before that, I was the Hong Kong correspondent and news editor of the FT. So I made a very unfashionable shift from the editorial side, the content side, the pointy-headed side, the good side of the media business to the commercial, the brutal, the bad side of the media world. Now, I dispute all that because I actually think that instead of sort of going to the dark side, what I've actually done is kind of gone into the light. I've come out of a convent and I'm really I really learnt how my own industry has operated. Because before you live in a bit of a sheltered workshop in editorial, everyone's very nice to you and make sure that you can work efficiently in a very safe bubble, not unaffected by the commercial realities of the real world. But having stepped out of the bubble, or burst my bubble, I've suddenly realised that it's a lot harder to write about your own P&L, well, to have your own P&L, I should say, rather than to write about somebody else's, which is kind of what I used to do. So Adi has just given me my brief, and I suppose I should have some bona fides for you in your world. I am a bit involved with not-for-profit. In fact, I'm a bit involved with Common Purpose. I'm on the board in Asia Pacific. My company is a lot involved with Room to Read. I might make an example of that a little bit later when we're talking about how the private sector works well with the public sector. I'm also on the board of the Hong Kong International Literary Festival, which is a charity and does exactly what it says. So they're sort of the three things that I work with personally in my own time. At the same time, I also work a little bit with, it's not a not-for-profit, but it's all about incubation. So I do a little bit of coaching with young business people. I'm tired of the word entrepreneurs, so I'm just going to call them business people because that's what they really are. Young business people who are setting up and searching for money, looking for rounds of finance, getting their networks established so that they can really kind of push themselves to success, I suppose. And that's more, not so much about IPOs, everyone listing on the stock exchange and making a fortune. It's just about them getting a viable business up and going. Of course, everyone would love to have an IPO, make a fortune, or a trade sale and also make a fortune, but you know, that's their business, not my business, that bit. So I think maybe I should start from the top, just on that women in leadership issue. Well, there's lots of women leaders, as we all know, and I saw that when I quickly scanned down the list of the people who are participating, there's quite a lot of people here from the Women's Foundation, and I suppose they've got very strong, well, I know they have very strong leadership, and they're doing a great deal of work to promote women in leadership roles, as well as promoting the welfare and benefit of underprivileged women and girls in Hong Kong. So they've got quite a broad brief. And I think they would say, and you can correct me on this, that there should be positive discrimination about women in business as long as those women have got the ability to participate. And the FT had a leadership summit for women a couple of years ago. We had one in London and we followed it up in Shanghai with another conference on the same topic. And we had Christine Lagarde speak to us at the second conference, and of course, you know, she runs the IMF, and before that she was the French finance minister. And she also has a permanent tan. I've never met a woman that has such a fabulous tan. Anyway, she assures me she works very hard. So she was speaking at our event, and before, and I was one of the people that was briefing her on the topic, and before we started, she said, I don't believe in quotas, I don't believe in positive discrimination, I'm going to come out against that. But in the process, in the following week, she was giving quite a lot of thought to it, and then she got up on stage and, thank God, said exactly the opposite, because that was a news story, right? No one cares if Christine Lagarde says, I don't care about quotas. But if someone like her gets up and says, I think quotas are a great idea, it was a really wonderful stories on the front page of the New York Times, the Asian Wall Street Journal, and of course the FT, and various other publications, obviously online, and a plethora of online sites. So that was great, it was very interesting. And the reason she changed her mind was because she just decided that there was so many men who were completely indifferent, or even worse, inert, were aware of the fact that perhaps women needed, or certainly women needed more, to be more comfortable about expressing themselves and moving forward as leaders, and being able to step up and say, there's nothing wrong with me putting myself forward for that job. Because I can assure you, from my position, when I look at people applying for roles or volunteering to do things, there's, and no offence to the guys in the room, but I've never met a man who does not have the confidence to apply for a job he's not qualified to do. It's always been the case for me, whereas women will go, oh, I'm not quite qualified for that, I've only got my master's, I don't have a PhD. So I think that if women are going to feel a little bit like they can't push themselves because they're much more self-analytical and perhaps self-critical, and men are going to be always out there really saying, well, I'm going to do it, I've got the Y chromosome, so I'm going to be the one, the first up at the first hand up in the room, then I think that it's probably a very good idea that there should be some kind of official push. And I suppose that's what the, what's the name of the club? The
30%.
Yeah, the 30% club, and that's what that's trying to do, I assume, and that is to make people much more aware of it, because unless you activate and help people think clearly about those issues, I think it's very hard to push women in business and ultimately in leadership roles. At the FT we have, and Pearson, my parent company, we've always had a very strong coterie of women leaders. In fact, Pearson's chief executive for 16 years was Dame Marjorie Scardino, and she was the first woman ever to be the CEO of a FTSE 100 company. So that's interesting. She always had half the board comprised of women. Her CFO was a woman. She refused to have a woman as the HR director. She said, I'm not going to stereotype women by sticking them, they're always on boards, but they're usually HR or communications, so she refused to have women in either of those roles. And I think that really helped the Pearson group make a big quantum leap. And so if you are in our company, in Pearson or at the FT, there is not that kind of, the glass ceiling is well and truly cracked. And I think that if you feel that you've got a role model, and we've got plenty of role models in our company, then I think that makes it a lot easier to lead in business. But I can imagine that I've got friends we all have friends that work in companies where, particularly many of the local companies or Chinese companies on the mainland, you don't run into very many non-executive directors or even executive directors who aren't members of the shareholder family. I think that's pretty common. But if they're competent leaders, that's fantastic, if that's the way that they're getting up and out in the market. So in terms of leadership in Hong Kong, I know that people like our chairman, Ronald Akali, he also believes that there should be much more positive discrimination for women. And as the former head of the stock exchange, I think probably his views have been quite widely aired. And the stock exchange itself has done a lot to support, I believe, more community business projects and the Women's Foundation projects. So I think if you can get into the heartland of society, well, I would say formal business society in places like Hong Kong, and that might be the stock exchange, that might be companies in the Hang Seng Index, then I think that's how you could start to make some real changes and help women assert themselves and feel more confident about stepping up into those leadership roles. I'm just trying to think of some, well, there's outstanding, in fact I think in China, and well, particularly in Hong Kong, there's an outstanding number of female leaders that have come through the government, because the government was sort of the proving ground for so many people, whether it's Anson Chan or Anna Wu or Christine Lowe. There's so many women, I think, in Hong Kong that have had a fantastic...
Not carry that.
Not carry that. Oh, no, we're not political yet. Although I've got to say, hey, she's worked very hard and she's done very well. I mean, you may not agree with her politics, but let's put the politics aside and think about, and of course she's a civil servant, she's not supposed to have politics, but if we put all that aside, she's done extremely well for herself and worked very hard, and she's a very clever individual. And in fact, CY Leung, I should say, has got 4 women on Exco. He's had more than the previous 2 CEs have. So I mean, he is doing his bit, I think, for the girls. But leadership in Hong Kong, I think, it's on the agenda. But whether I don't know how long it's going to take for it to be just something you don't really have to think about because it's already embedded and happening there. I suppose you had a topic on women in leadership. I'll tell you how I became a leader. Or just accidents. So a lot of the time with women it is accidents. You kind of find yourself there and you just start doing the job and it works out. If it doesn't work out, you're shown the door, but if it does work out, you're extremely lucky. And in my case, I took over when the market was at a bit of a low, and they merged my job with another person's job. And really, as long as I didn't do anything particularly stupid, I could just ride the market up, and then that just made me look quite clever because our revenues and profits just started going up because so was everybody else's in all the companies that we were dealing with. So that was great. Well, how you lead in adversity, which brings me neatly into that, is another thing entirely. But it's very important to be a wonderful actor because you have to be completely confident. Even if you don't have to be completely confident about everything you do, but you have to be completely confident as a person. And that's how you can make people not feel wobbly during the day or go home and wake up at night with the cold sweats. So for example, as you probably all know, the media world, the publishing world has had the most extraordinary changes over the last 10 years. When you were young, I'm sure, well, actually when all of you were young, really young, there was no such thing as the internet. Everyone got their news from television, radio, and newspapers and magazines. But now everyone's first port of call is a blend of all that. So, and actually a lot of people get their first port of call on news is going to be Facebook because of the various streams that are coming through on social media platforms such as Facebook, such as Instagram. Even Snapchat now has done a deal with Google on news. So there's just an amazing number of, there's intermarriage everywhere. So that of course means that a very expensive infrastructure that you operate with a newspaper, when you're trying to publish 440,000 copies of the newspaper every day, which is what we were doing about 8 years ago, you then think, right, well, there are fewer people buying those newspapers, there are more people getting their news from other places, so we have to start to change our business model dramatically to be able to compete. So you have to reduce the number of copies you print, you have to increase the number of people who are buying your content, and that's the important thing for us, buying your content online, because I don't care how you, actually, I'm agnostic about how you consume the Financial Times content as long as you're paying for it. I don't believe in free content, and I think that it costs a lot of money to have our 580 journalists operating around the world, and I think it costs a lot of money to have our editors make decisions about what they think is newsworthy, what they should be putting up on the website. And the newspaper itself is a lovely curation. So it's like a snapshot of what some of the world's leading journalists think is important at a particular time of the day, and then that comes out as a beautiful pink newspaper following in the next day. So I think that paying for it is critical. So we don't have any truck with people who say that the information should be free. Rubbish should be free, I suppose popular news should be free because there's so many ways to get it. And also, Who knows? Who knows whether Miley Cyrus has got a new tattoo? Who knows whether Kim Kardashian's having twins or a single? It's all conjecture. So why would I want to pay for that news? Anybody can make that up and just put it up online. So I don't think you should have to pay for that. It's a bit of a free-for-all, and I think it's probably right that it should be free. But news that comes from The Economist, from us, probably the New York Times, I suppose what I'm being is a bit of a snob and talking about the quality press. I think you have to pay for it because there's a hell of a lot of investment and infrastructure in there that has to be maintained. And of course, our stuff is a business tool. People use it, it helps them make money at work, so I suppose it's probably thought to be a good investment. Nonetheless, that's a long-winded way of saying that about 6 years ago we decided we were going to have to making steady changes to our business model was not going to be sufficient. We were going to have to do some pretty drastic stuff. So essentially we were going to move a whole lot of people that used to work on the newspaper as journalists to online. And that was like pulling fingernails out because those guys had been coming into work at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and subbing everybody's stories and editing everyone's stories and then leaving the office at 11:30 for decades. So trying to change that kind of mentality and work practice was really hard. On the commercial side, we had to say that, well, we don't really want to spend as much money on marketing. We want to spend more money on engaging our potential audience and our current audience. So that meant shifting a lot of money from one side of the business to the other side of the business. Now, if you can retrain and move people and they're willing to change, then there's no problem. However, a lot of people just didn't want to change. So that meant quite a lot of redundancy. And when you start having those terrible conversations where 5 or 6 people end up going a day through the conference room and they're sitting down with their manager and HR, it's soul destroying for the office because everyone is waiting to see if the boom is going to land on them next. And I've got to say that I think media groups tend to be pretty... I used to work for News International in London as a journalist, and on one single... I don't know how... I was very young and very resilient, but on one single day they made 32 journalists redundant in one newsroom. And 32 of them went through and had those interviews over a 4.5-hour period. So that's not how to build consensus and morale in a company, for sure. So what we've tried to do, and this 6 years ago, was to sit down and talk to everybody first, and talk about the business plan, try and help people understand where we want to take the business. We decided that we were going to put a lot of the vacancies up and just say, if you think you're qualified for this or want to become qualified for this, go for it. So there was a lot of pre-work and a lot of it had to come from me and 2 or 3 other leaders in the company. So leadership is actually leading. So it's not sitting in your office and producing beautiful memos. It's actually standing up in front of people and leading them through the ideas and leading them through the change. And I think if I'd been very quiet about it, there would have been a lot more resistance. And I also showed how that I was going to have to change my role as well. Of course, a lot of people got quite upset, and for a while there was a nice chat room which was called I Hate the FT. But eventually that closed down because there were so many other people that they could hate more than the FT, because really if you were going to scale it, what we did was not as bad and perhaps a little bit more humane, because we were trying to give people a chance to change themselves rather than us just booting them out. Because I always think that people's experience is worth something. If you've been with a company, if you've been with Room to Read for 5 years, there's a value for your knowledge. And that is, it's hard to put an actual number on it, but I think it's extremely valuable. It's your personal equity in that business, and that business has equity in you. So I think that if you can maintain that equity, but perhaps just make it fungible into something else, that's what you should be doing. So leading through change was sticky, scary, but not as soul-destroying as I think it might have been. But it does involve an incredible amount of energy, being visible, and of course what you really want to do is hide, but hiding is totally the worst thing to do. I look at someone like Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan. I mean, he has had the most extraordinary 10 years, but he is always out there. He's never retiring, he's always out there taking responsibility for things that go wrong in his bank, talking about what's going on in his market, whether it's right or wrong, and just stepping up and taking responsibility. And that, of course, means that he's been in that fantastically well-paid job for quite some time. And in fact, why is he in that well-paid job? I mean, the man's been earning over $200 million a year for 10 years. Surely that's enough money. But then that's another story. I think it's all about the adrenaline high and how everyone gets addicted to that sort of thing. Now, of course, you don't want to do that because that's just not in your social ethos. But I think I think there's something to be said for lassoing a lot of those corporate practices and taking the best of them and applying them to your own business. For example, I'll use a room to read example. When John Wood started it several years ago, 12, 15, it was still a very, very small charity NGO about 10 years ago. It became the FT's Charity of the Year. We support one particular charity or organisation every year for the Christmas appeal. And when we say we support it, we really support it. So we send journalists off around the world to write stories about their projects and about the people. We run lots of ads in the newspaper and online. We do video interviews and stream them. We are really very engaged. Now, Room to Read was tiny and really needed a big boost of cash. And so we were able to raise over £4 million over a 4-week period for them through the engagement with the FT and the FT's audience. Now that really was a big game changer for Room to Read. It really gave them a global base. It gave them a lot of money in the bank, and it really helped them accelerate and amplify their programs. So that was a clever use of us, and of course it helps ticks all our boxes, vis-a-vis, well, the callous boxes, about how we should be involved with sustainability and our charitable foundation work. But on the other hand, it's also very important for as a retention tool now for a lot of our employees. A lot of our employees really, really wanted to be involved with the Christmas appeal because they want to write about these projects, they want to meet these people, they want to feel that by working for the FT, they are doing some good beyond the voracious and ambitious world of finance. So it's great for us, that's a symbiosis. It's great for us because it's a retention tool that makes our staff feel better, but it's fantastic for charities like Room to Read because they get to have a very concentrated access to a very powerful and wealthy audience. Other ways I think NGOs can work very well and effectively with private sector, apart from just raising money, is embedding. What we've done a couple of times, or several times at the FT in London and New York and also in Hong Kong, is we embed people from not-for-profit in our own company, and we kind of make them interns, but glamorous interns, for anything up to, well, three to 6 months, although not many small organisations can let somebody promising go away for 6 months. But I think it has to be 3 months for it to be meaningful. But we bring them in, they work in a certain part of the company. Often it's right at the front line, because what you can learn from companies is how to sell. And what you're doing a lot of the time is selling you and your organisation as a really valid place for people to invest their time and also their money. So having sales skills is really critical, because you may think, oh, I'm not selling services, but you are selling yourself, and you are selling your organisation as a trustworthy brand. So I like to put our NGO embedment people into the sales teams and send them out to see clients with other salespeople and see how pitching is done, see how presentations are pulled together, those long, tedious decks that, well, actually people do read them, funny enough. How you pull those together, how you get continuity and a line of thought and bring it right through to the end where you go in and really go in for the kill and tell them exactly what you want. So I think that's a fantastic skill that people can take away from the private sector pretty easily just by having some exposure.